Everyone thought Roy Orbison's heart just gave up for 30 years. Leaked medical records, however, present a different picture. Months before he passed away, his doctors were aware of a problem. They discovered evidence of chemicals that shouldn't have been present. He didn't record music at his most recent session. He was gathering proof of the actual events that befell his family. His 2 sons were killed in a fire that was not an accident. Roy had evidence, and someone wanted him to keep quiet. You won't believe what he found out about that terrible night. Who actually killed the Orbison family is revealed by the recording he left behind. At 3:30 in the afternoon on April 23, 1936, Roy Kelton Orbison was born in Vernon, Texas, just as families were struggling to make ends meet and the Dust Bowl was raking the land. He was raised in a modest home by his parents, Orby Lee and Nain Schultz Orbison, who were constantly on the go due to employment. Orby was a garage mechanic and oil well driller, and Roy's early recollections were influenced by the sound of engines and country music. Long, silent evenings and dust storms characterized Vernon's harshness. However, he felt a spark ignite within that small abode. Roy begged for a harmonica at 6. Instead, after dark, his father handed him a guitar and taught him some basic chords. Upon the day's eventual slowdown, the guitar remained with him and influenced the course he would take throughout his lifetime. Roy's passion for music deepened as he matured. He was already picking up the songs Orby performed during family get-togethers at Music 6. By 8, Roy was singing Hank Williams songs like Lovesick Blues in front of a microphone at the Vernon radio station KVWC. His little earnings, typically only enough for school supplies, were extremely valuable to a family still struggling with the effects of the Great Depression. Neighbors who listened to that radio program began to talk about the child with a powerful voice since his voice seemed older than his years. He started writing songs gradually as well, putting his emotions on paper before releasing them to the world. Then a more significant event took place. He gained a weekly position on KVWC at age 8. When he was 9, he won a radio competition and was given his own Saturday show. At that time, he sat outside his grandmother's house and wrote his debut song, A Vow of Love. He participated in a traveling medical show talent competition in 1946. He tied first place with his renditions of Joel Blonde and Mountain Dew. $15 was the reward. Roy handed half of his $7.50 to his friend who had brought his guitar. Even before his name became well known, that modest deed revealed who he was. After that, things changed once more. The family relocated to Wink, Texas in 1946. Orby was drawn there by work in the oil fields, and the town had little in common with Vernon. Wink was lonely, arid, and little. According to Roy, it was sand, oil, grease, football, and oil fields. Nothing warm, nothing delicate. The peaceful stillness surrounding Wink molded the lonely sound that would eventually reverberate through his lyrics, as the scenery seeped into him. He started his first band, the Wink Westerners, when he was 13. Before performing at nearby honky tonks, the boys practiced swing and country music. In nearby Kermit, Texas, they even received a weekly spot on Curve. The money began to trickle in. For a teenager in the 1940s, Roy, music, made $400 at one dance, which was a significant sum. Every performance strengthened his conviction that music might be the solution. But then he had an unforgettable suffering in life. When Roy was 17 years old in 1953, his mother Nain unexpectedly passed away from a respiratory disease. It broke his heart. Wink was already lonely. And now there was no one left to anchor him. To support his father, Roy took on various jobs, sometimes working late into the night as a gas pump. He pushed inward from grief. Everything he experienced was transformed into music by him. Every pain, every bit of loneliness, every query. His later ballads, which caused everyone to pause and listen, were filled with same feelings. He may need a fallback, so in 1954 he enrolled in North Texas State College in Denton to study geology. Geology didn't hold him, though. Music did. He changed to history and English a year later. He played with Dick Penner, W.D.E. Moore, and Billy Patt, music, Ellis while in college, sustaining the Wink Westerners. They performed at fraternity gatherings and composed tunes. They recorded Ooby Dooby in 1955 at Jim Beck's Dallas studio. Sun Records' new rockabilly sound, music, served as inspiration. The truth came to Roy after the song became a local smash. Music had ceased to be a fantasy. It was a path to success. After just one semester, he transferred to Odessa Junior College from North Texas State. After forming the Teen Kings there, he quickly won a talent competition that led to them landing a TV show on KMID in Midland. He headed for Memphis with that vigor. The Teen Kings went to Music, Sun Records for an audition in April 1956 after Papa Hollifield, the owner of a record store, played Ooby Dooby to Sam Phillips on the phone. After hearing that, Phillips asked them to Sunday. After being re-recorded on March 19, 1956, the song rose to number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100 a few months later. 200,000 copies were sold. For the first time, Roy experienced nationwide success. But there were fissures behind the ascent. Roy aimed to capture poignant ballads. Quick rockabilly was what Phillips desired. They had different visions. The follow-up singles didn't make the charts. Roy only stayed at Sun for 7 months before the Teen Kings disbanded at the end of 1956. Then anger became more audible. Roy fought royalty conflicts, arguing that Phillips was deducting excessive amounts from his revenues, a complaint that many Sun artists made at the time. The Adolescent Kings were finished by December 1956, at which point Roy finally left Sun. He even briefly considered becoming an oilfield worker like his father. However, he was drawn back to music when his song Claudette, which he had written for his wife, was featured as the B-side to the Everly Brothers' hit song All I Have to Do Is Dream. The song peaked at number 30 in 1959. He lived with his parents in Wink after spending the earnings too quickly and purchasing a pink Cadillac, leaving him broke once more. Claudette, however, signaled a change. It demonstrated his ability to write hits while surviving the industry. He signed a Nashville contract with Alf Rose in 1957. Wesley Rose encouraged him to pursue publishing and songwriting because he had faith in him. Roy was able to buy out his Sun contract with that help. He even performed as Johnny Cash's opening act at the Grand Ole Opry, a performance that propelled his music from the hardships of Texas into the core of country music. Along with Johnny Cash and the Wink Westerners, he went on a tour of honky-tonks around the South in 1958. Every night, the crowds yelled for boisterous music. However, people stopped talking and listened when Roy took the stage for an encore and let loose his 3-octave voice. Something larger drew him in with that voice. Then there was turmoil again. Roy discovered that the tour's funds had been embezzled by his manager. The revelation almost destroyed him. With just enough money to get by, Roy returned to Nashville and got jobs performing in demos. Although betrayal left him shaken, it made him, music, reconsider everything. It drove him to Monument Records, where he at last discovered his true calling. He became a legend thanks to the one that contained Merely Lonely and all the other songs. Monument Records was founded by Roy Orbison in 1959. More optimism than certainty. However, Fred Foster's perception of music changed when he heard Uptown. With strings rising behind his falsetto, the song had a slow, dark burn to it. Additionally, it opened a door, but only peaked at number 72 on the Billboard in late 1960. On the B-side sat The Real Spark. When Only the Lonely was released in May 1960, it quickly gained popularity. By October, it had risen to number 1 in the UK after reaching number 2 in the US. For 24 weeks, it remained on the UK charts longer than any of his previous releases. In the US alone, more than 1 million copies were sold. This calm man with a big voice appeared everywhere all of a sudden. He also raised the standard for pop-up music, with the sound he created in the studio. Even before they were aware of his name, people could sense that voice. Almost without warning, he began entering rooms he had previously only imagined. Only Those Who Were Lonely managed to become more than a hit as the world continued to swirl. It brought Roy's reputation to nations that hardly knew American rock by the end of 1961, and it had sold an additional 1 million copies in the US. The passion in each breath, the dramatic strings, the crescendos. It didn't feel like anything you heard on the radio. Artists listened intently. The Beatles heard him. The buildings were studied by the Beach Boys. Because it seemed like Heartbreak Rising, fans tightened their grip on that falsetto. Roy Orbison began to establish himself as a major force in both rock and pop with the song, which remained on the UK charts for almost 6 months. Someone with the ability to shake the room without lifting his hand. He exuded a similar type of subdued strength. Additionally, it was an accident. He performed at a gig in 1963 without wearing his prescription music spectacles. He put on his normal pair of dark shades for the outdoors. Instead of feeling anxious, the audience saw something enigmatic, and he felt less exposed, almost concealed inside the frame. He left them on. They soon became a part of him. The brightness of those lenses allowed people to see him from across a stadium, and the spectacles became as famous as the voice that reverberated above each stage. Like Elvis, he danced with the beat and rocked his hips, yet his stillness, music, on stage emanated from the same place. Roy entered the spotlight and hardly moved. When Blue Angel first came out in 1961 and rose to number 9, his admirers watched him stand still, wearing all black, and letting his voice do just that. It was not a ruse. It was not a stance. It was faith in music itself. During his performances, the music slowed and the audience leaned in. People recalled the sensation long after the lights had gone out. And his signature emerged from that silence. But life was cracking behind the stage lights. As his touring schedule increased, his marriage to Claudette Freddie suffered the most. He was seldom at home when he recorded Running Scared, his first #1 song, in 1961. The distance widened. He was touring Britain by 1963. And Claudette began an affair with the contractor constructing their house in Hendersonville, Tennessee, since she was lonely and exhausted. Roy was deeply shocked to learn. In November of 1964, they got divorced. They then remarried in August 1965, following the birth of their third child, in an attempt to restore something, music, that had become brittle. The tale of their marriage demonstrated how a man's life may be subtly torn apart while being elevated to new heights by celebrity. And still the music continued to rise despite all this chaos. After being released in July 1961, Crying gained notoriety on its own. On October 7, 1961, it debuted at #1 on the US Cashbox chart. It also peaked at #2 on Billboard, #25 in the UK, and 3 weeks in a row at the top of the Australian charts in November. Sold more than 8 million copies. People's memories of the Spanish guitar solo lasted for years, and it even influenced the flamenco rock style 10 years later. In 2002, the song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Music. Furthermore, Rolling Stone ranked it at #69 on its list of the 500 best songs ever in 2010. It wasn't only a hit. It was a revelation. The tour that further cemented his legacy followed. A young band called the Beatles opened for Roy when he led a UK tour in May 1963. Nobody realized they were going to take the globe by storm with their music. The trip began slowly on May 18 and concluded in Blackburn on June 9. 17 dates that traveled throughout Scotland, Wales, and England. Roy was initially the main act, but the Beatles became co-headliners due to their rapid growth. Even back then, Roy frequently stole a show. The audience at London's Gaumont Cinema yelled as he sang in Dreams, and others backstage questioned how anyone could keep up with him. John Lennon referred to him as the world's best singer. Roy would blow the crowd away every night, so Ringo Starr claimed it was awful to be after him. It's over-propelled him to even greater heights in 1964. For a total of 18 weeks, it topped the charts for 2 weeks, peaking at #9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and #1 in the UK. The intense passion shook the room when Roy, after disagreeing with Claudette, taped it in one take. His voice soared, the strings rose, and everything was caught by engineer Bill Porter and producer Fred Foster. Cashbox described the music as a heartfelt lament from a lover. Every line's emotion was commended by Billboard. It turned to become one of his most popular songs. Oh, Pretty Woman followed next. He and Bill Dez wrote it in about 40 minutes at Roy's house on July 24, 1964. Claudette announced her departure. Roy immediately started singing the initial line of Diz's joke, "A pretty woman never needs money." Roy was one of 4 guitarists who recorded the song on August 1 at RCA Studio B in Nashville. It sold over 7 million copies, became his second #1 single, and peaked at #1 in the US and the UK in September 1964. Because the bass riff sounded too sexual, some radio stations initially declined to broadcast it. It became one of the decade's most popular songs despite all of it, but not without its problems. Roy acknowledged having groupie encounters on the road in 1964. Claudette already felt isolated, and her feelings of jealousy, music, intensified until they drove her to commit adultery. Oh, Pretty Woman peaked in November 1964, the same month Roy filed for divorce after learning of the affair. The divorce was finalized by early 1965. Nevertheless, within 10 months, they were reunited, attempting to mend the damage caused by fear, distance, and celebrity. Peace returned for a short while, but tragedy ensued. Near Gallatin, Tennessee, on June 6, 1966, Roy and Claudette, music, were riding motorcycles. A pickup truck arrived. An hour after being thrown, Claudette passed away in Roy's arms. She was just 24. Roy was hushed by the shock, but he survived with only minor wounds. For months, he canceled shows. Following her burial in Hendersonville, he attempted to breathe in a world that was abruptly empty. His song Too Soon to Know, which carried his anguish with it, peaked at #3 in the UK 2 months later. Roy had recorded Crawling Back in October 1965, even before she passed away. After it peaked at #46, the label encouraged him to write lighter songs that didn't reflect his feelings. The urge to sound positive conflicted with the sadness in his chest, and the sessions frequently caused him to break down. Even if the public didn't completely hear it at the time, the song turned into a silent admission of what he held. Then there was a loss that was nearly too big to mention. Roy's Hendersonville house was destroyed by fire on September 14, 1968, while he was on tour in England. In their sleep, his kids Anthony, age 6, and Roy Dwayne, age, music, passed away. The only one who survived was 3-year-old Wesley, who was dragged out by his grandparents. In less than an hour, the house was completely destroyed by fire. Investigators surmised that outdated wiring caused an aerosol can to explode. When Roy heard the news from across the ocean, his entire being, music, broke once more. He was unable to write, speak, or just bear the weight of it for a long time. He sold the land to Johnny Cash following the fire. Across the ashes, Cash planted an orchard and assured Roy that only wonderful things would now grow there. Despite its smallness, the deed grew to represent hope. Later on, Roy expressed his desire to recall the love that existed there rather than the suffering. In 2008, Barry Gibb had constructed a new house on the land, which had undergone numerous ownership changes. Nevertheless, the memory persisted, etched into Roy's heart and the ground. His physical condition suffered as a result. He started smoking a chain, sometimes 2 packs a day. His ulcers, which had plagued him since 1960, became more severe. The stress was eating away at him from the inside, doctors said. He continued to perform, nevertheless. The only thing that kept him upright when life was trying to knock him down was music. When Roy Orbison entered 1965, he had a big decision to make. Because MGM offered him $1 million and discussed movie parts, he left Monument Music Records, the label that had helped him achieve success with songs like Oh Pretty Woman. Although it seemed like a fresh start, there was a high price to pay. Every year, he was required to record a stream of singles and 3 complete albums. And the pressure drove him to write almost 70 songs in just his first year. All music radio stations were playing the Beatles and the rest of the British Invasion, while his debut MGM single, Rideway, barely made it to music 100 on the Billboard chart. Although his first MGM record peaked at #1 in Canada and the UK, hardly anyone in America took note. 3 songs have made it to the US Top 40 by the end of his MGM years. His inventiveness persisted despite the fact that he had written or co-authored 42 of the first 70 music songs he delivered, but the timing kept falling apart. And then there was 1967. Roy traveled around Australia for 14 days, and he managed to fit 20 gigs into that brief time. He performed on stages in Mount Gambier, Sydney, Adelaide, and Perth. He even played 2 gigs at Sydney Stadium in a single day on January 21. However, he was deeply saddened by the loss of his wife, Claudette, in June of 1966. Grief and jet lag eroded his voice. According to reviews, he sounded exhausted and hoarse. He continued to walk onto every stage and make an effort to give the audience what they had come for, but every performance drained him of a strength that he was unable to replenish. In 1968, a year later, he released Walk On. Hiding beneath layers of strings he never wanted, it was regarded by many as one of his most poignant compositions. His voice was drowned out by the glossy, overproduced style that MGM had imposed. The song peaked at number 53 in Australia, 39 in the UK, 93 in Canada, and 121 in the United States. It became a recall of music and a symbol of what he was battling against, of how frequently his ideas were ignored while others dictated the sound of his music. Life continued to go on, though. Roy and Barbara Jacobs were married in Nashville on March 25, 1969. She turned 19. He had met her just before a house fire in September 1968 claimed the lives of 2 of his boys. Paparazzi, who were more interested in making noise, music, than in comprehending the significance of the occasion, were drawn to the wedding. It was dubbed a rebound. They handled it as if it were a show. But since she restored a tiny bit of brightness to his existence, Roy clung to her. Later, they had 2 sons, Roy Kelton Jr. and Alexander, and he did everything in his power to protect music, that new family, as the outside world continued to try to invade his personal sorrow. The loneliness increased when he moved to Nashville for new MGM recordings later that year. Bob Dylan saw it, too. Roy hardly talked, as if the weight of everything had driven him inward, according to Dylan, who had seen Roy once. Instead of recording with personal friends, Roy used session players, and the atmosphere was frequently chilly. He had been forced into a quiet corner where music no longer felt like home after years of pressure, loss, and label control. And then 1970. In an attempt to change the momentum, Roy released God Love You under MGM. Penny Arcade, Music, was on the album, and it became the UK's top tune. It was his 3rd number 1 there, demonstrating that Britain was still paying attention. However, the album only sold 50,000 copies in the United States. His ballad seemed out of place as disco took over radio stations and retail establishments. Nevertheless, years later, some copies of the record sold for hundreds of dollars, making it a collector's treasure. However, it was another indication at the time that his connection with American viewers was waning. The years that followed put him to the ultimate test. Roy suffered damage to his throat during a strenuous British tour in 1972, which forced him to take a 6-month hiatus from performing. Although he was annoyed by the lack of music, he utilized it to write in the middle of the night for the Golden Globe-nominated movie of the same name. But the wound frightened him. He missed every opportunity for marketing that may have helped music resurrect his career because he was afraid his voice, music, might not come back. He signed with Mercury Records, Music, in 1973 and made an effort to follow the latest trends. He tried to get a hold of changing tastes by recording a country rock rendition of Sweet Caroline. Punk and glam rock, however, were booming. Headlines featured names like Lou Reed and David Bowie, while Roy's track peaked at number 104 on the Billboard charts. It sold 70,000 copies, which was significantly less than anyone had anticipated. However, this stage paved the way for later national partnerships that enabled him to regain his footing in the 1980s. His health thereafter deteriorated. Roy experienced severe chest problems on a Hawaiian trip in late 1977. Physicians discovered serious coronary artery disease. He had triple bypass surgery on January 18, 1978. Although he spent months trying to get back into shape and shed 20 pounds, he never completely stopped smoking, despite the fact that it almost killed him. The one thing he couldn't give up was performing, so he went back on stage earlier than the doctors permitted. Trouble started up again in 1979. He suffered a serious infection after a tour bus accident in Canada. Due to his cardiac issues and ulcers, doctors cautioned that touring could be fatal. Most of the warnings went unheeded. He continued to perform, persevered in overcoming his phobia, and attempted to adapt to slower timetables. His survival instincts were frequently subdued by his devotion. Laminar Flow was released by him in 1980. The album was a weird, futuristic one, full of ambient sounds and synths. The general population was unsure of its meaning. It didn't chart, and none of the songs made it to the top 100. However, the CD eventually gained a little fan base. Later, certain songs were likened by listeners to the Human League and early Depeche Mode. Despite the fact that it didn't become popular, it demonstrated his courage to try new sounds long before they were popular. In 1988, however, things took a different turn for him. Together with George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne, Roy joined the Traveling Wilburys. Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 began as an unintentional recording and evolved into a whole album. He added those soaring harmonies that people had been missing for years and adopted the name Lefty Wilbur. Over 2 million copies of the album were sold, and Handle with Care made it into the top 50. Roy was viewed with new views by fans, and musicians were appreciative that he had joined their ranks. It was a renewal. He then went on to record Mystery Girl. It was released in January 1989, a few weeks after his passing. You Got It achieved his highest Billboard ranking since 1964, coming in at number 9. The album rose to number 2 in the UK and number 5 in the US. Globally, it sold over 3 million copies. The world briefly recalled the beauty of his voice in a way that was both joyful and terrible. Roy had been experiencing excruciating chest pains throughout Wilbur's sessions. Jeff Lynne and others pleaded with him to get assistance, but he dismissed their pleas. Having endured so many hardships, he believed he could overcome this one as well. He continued to work despite being debilitated by years of smoking and an earlier bypass surgery. It felt abrupt that he had died on December 6, 1988, despite the warnings. After spending the day laughing and playing remote control airplanes with his sons, he passed out in his bathroom at the age of 52. He was not revived by the doctors. According to the autopsy, there were serious obstructions that had been accumulating for years. After then, Mystery Girl was released, earning him an enormous Grammy. After his passing, he became the only performer since Elvis Presley to have 2 albums simultaneously in the top 5. In 2018, his wife Barbara developed a holographic performance using over 200,000 hand-touched shots and safeguarded his library. In 2019, his son started the Roy Orbison Legacy Tour, which used a virtual avatar to bring him back to the stage. Fans in the US, UK, and Europe witnessed Roy sing once more in a manner that was unthinkable just a few decades prior. His concluding remarks provide the story's last twist. He discussed arrangements for the Mystery Girl World Tour with Barbara. Excitement filled him. He was prepared. Months prior, doctors had cautioned him that if he didn't alter his lifestyle, he would be at great risk. However, he continued. Days before he passed away, he was full of plans, full of enthusiasm, and full of simple, cozy family moments.